The White Sox have a problem at catcher, but it's a good one, and my guest will go over how it can be solved on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So Dylan Barnas of FutureSox.net and JustBaseball.com joins me today to discuss what the White Sox can do with Kyle Teel and Edgar Quero's at-bats, the offseason, and some prospect talk. And Dylan, you wrote on Just Baseball how you're in the camp of the catcher DH split for Teel and Quero. So what do you say to those that say eventually one has to be the long-term starter? And, what do you say to that?
I think that a two-catcher split isn't as bad as a lot of fans might think because, you saw what the Braves did with Sean Murphy and Travis d'Arnaud. And yes, they weren't together while they were on their World Series run, but you look at what they did when both of them were there. They were both very productive. And I'm not saying that Quero and Teel are going to live up to the expectations of Sean Murphy and Travis d'Arnaud. I mean, Murphy is one of the better catchers in the league. He was banged up this year, but having two good catchers is not necessarily a bad thing. And, I wrote in my article, if you trade out of an elite catching duo, you would have to be at least a top 10. You would have to be getting at least a top 10 player at the position that you're trading for. So how much do you value, let's say, the 15th best second baseman? Granted, you're upgrading maybe 5 spots, but then you also are downgrading catcher. So I think that there's just a give and take there that I would rather have a very good, very young catching duo that you can mold in any way that you would like. Because at the end of the day, catching is one of the hardest positions to fill consistently. And if the White Sox can fill it with not one, but 2 guys, that is just a luxury that not many teams have ever had the right to say.
Yeah, and usually if you want to move a young catcher too, it's usually not to a contender. It's going to be to a small market team. I mean, look at how you mentioned the Braves. Well, the Braves had Contreras at one point.
Exactly.
And they had to do a 3-team deal. And it was the A's that ended up actually getting all those players. And they actually got I would say a terrible trade package because all the Brewers had to give up was Abraham Toro.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be tough to find a team who is not only willing to take on a young catcher like Quero or Teel. Granted, both of them have shown flashes of being that franchise backstop, but neither of them have necessarily reached that level yet. Teel was great this year. Quero was a step behind him. But if somebody's trading for Edgar Quero, they're not going to sell low on him. They're going to want to get enough value for him where you can justify downgrading at the backup catcher position. So I don't think that there's many teams that would be willing to give up what the White Sox would be wanting in return. And I don't think that the White Sox are actively shopping around Quero or Teel because you traded for Teel less than a year ago and you traded for Quero about 18 months before right now. So I think that you just have to let it play out. And I think that if you don't trade for Kyle Teel, then everything is a lot simpler. Yes. But the fact that they did trade for Kyle Teel, it shows they're willing to play 2 young catchers very frequently. And I don't think that they would have traded for Kyle Teel with the expectation of just flipping one of he or Quero in a year's time. So I think that they're going to let it play out. If it ends up shaking out where, one is significantly worse than the other, then they'll probably move off of them. But as it stands right now, I don't think that necessarily moving them would be the way that I would go. I can see if some fans would want to do that, but I think that you just let it play out. Both of these guys had crazy prospect hype. I mean, both of them ended up being, I think, top 60-ish prospects in the league based on whichever outlet you prefer. So both of them have very high prospect hype. They didn't have the greatest rookie seasons. Teel did. Quero was a bit behind him. So I think that you just got to let it play out. I'm going to say that for a lot of White Sox prospects as they're coming up, because, we saw what just happened with Braden Montgomery. He looked like one of the worst players in AAA, and then took some time off, got right with Ryan Fuller, and then came up and was the White Sox best player in the second half. So I think that if you can have a turnaround like that, I'm not going to be shipping away anybody just because they had a bad rookie season.
I like how you said let that play out, because I think there's a couple things, like how you also said, like, well, if they get devalued at some point, you might get these people that are like, well, then you lose out on their potential highest trade value. I think what people are missing, and I'm not trying to insult the White Sox fan base, but some on that area, is some of these guys are just valuable only to the White Sox at this point right now, because again, like you said, the numbers don't support right now Edgar Quero being a power hitting catcher, for example. The same with Kyle Teel. You still have to give him plenty of at-bats, and you do have that DH spot to use where you can split the at-bats. So I like that you brought that up, because they still have ways to go in their development where you don't even have to make this decision on who's going to be the long-term catcher.
Yeah, and if one of them ends up moving to first base, I think that both of them can hold their own over there, especially defensively. We can see a lot of catchers moving to first base. They're able to do just fine over there because first base is, I don't want to say the easiest position to play on the diamond, but it's less taxing on the body than catcher. And you would wonder about how the bat would hold up compared to other first basemen. But I think that if you can have a franchise catcher and then a middle of the pack first baseman, that's fine by me. And then it comes back to the whole how do you get them at bats at DH with Andrew Benintendi and Mike Tauchman, because both of them are aging outfielders. You got to get them off of their feet at least one day a week. So then it comes back to how can you jumble everything together and not be a liability in the corners. So I think that an offseason Andrew Benintendi or Mike Tauchman trade is imminent. I'm not going to say it's happening, but I think that it probably will happen. I'm not going to say that I know exactly where and when it's going to happen, but I think that you go into the offseason with the expectation that a trade of one of them will happen. I'm not going to speculate on saying like, oh yeah, they're going to get a team's 38th best prospect, but I wouldn't imagine that you're going to get anything crazy for him. But I think that you can go into the offseason with at least one, maybe two trades on the horizon.
The one thing that actually, the at-bats for Tauchman and Benintendi don't really concern me. On the flip side, does this mean you can then have to carry Korey Lee on the roster? Because I felt like that was Will Venable's security blanket to actually have Teel and Quero in the lineup together when it was feasible. I mean, obviously they didn't really try to have Teel hit against, lefties, left-handed pitchers that much, but it just feels like Venable then wants Korey Lee on that roster then to feel more comfortable in case he does have to give up the DH spot.
I think that with the two catcher position, with the two catcher every day at catcher or DH, I think that a third catcher is probably, you have to have it just as that safety blanket. And yeah, if it's Korey Lee, if it's an outside acquisition, if it's another catcher in the system, I think that you have to sort of come to terms with the fact that, yeah, it's probably going to be a third catcher as one of the bench spots. But, we saw Korey Lee play an inning in left field at the fan appreciation day that we were all at. I don't think that he can necessarily be a left fielder, but if you can have a catcher who can also play other positions, I think that's ultimately how you sort of slot everything in. And yeah, Korey Lee is not going to be the everyday left fielder for the White Sox next year. But if you can have a catcher who can also play, let's say, first base, third base, wherever, that could be how it shakes out. And, again, I hate to keep calling back to Travis d'Arnaud and Sean Murphy. Travis d'Arnaud played second base for the Mets when, I mean, he wasn't like their primary catcher, but he can play other positions. So I think that a third catcher is probably going to be how they sort of use the one of the bench spots. But I think that if it isn't a third catcher, I think that you look at like a Brooks Baldwin as an emergency catcher, because I mean, he can play basically everywhere. And I think catcher is the only position that he hasn't played other than first base. So I think that a Korey Lee as one of the bench spots is probably the way that Will Venable wants it, just to give him that extra. All right, if I take one of them out, we won't have to burn the DH. We won't have a pitcher hitting. We won't have Tyler Alexander hitting in extra innings like he did in Texas early on in the year. So I think Korey Lee makes a lot of sense for the one of the bench spots and the third catcher spot.
All right, well, let's tackle the offseason with Dylan and what position Chicago should target after the break. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets, that can be a hassle between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. It's frustrating. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. And I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals. Talking about your favorite NFL games for as low as $100. The app made it super simple. I could even see the exact view from my seats before buying. And I love zone deals too. Pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. Also, make sure to check out my ring content at SouthsideSox.com and on TapSportsNet.com. And here with Dylan Barnas, where you can find his amazing work at FutureSox.net, I believe, for the podcast, and then on JustBaseball.com, where you do some White Sox stuff. I just want to make sure, did I get all that right? Did I get you the proper plug?
Yes, that is perfect.
All right, and we can also, where can we find you on social media?
I'm at Twitter at NotCease because I'm Dylan, but I'm not Dylan Cease. That's sort of the origin of my username. I get asked that a lot because it's a funny little play on words there.
Yeah, and also you're a good sport when, people tackle your age and all that type of stuff. Yeah. But hey, you know what? You don't have to. You can start doing this stuff whenever. You can have opinions on that. So that's why he's a good follow on social media. And you do the Future Sox podcast with Elijah, right?
Yes, yeah.
All right, cool. So make sure you check out FutureSox.net, subscribe to the YouTube channel there. So, Dylan, what do you think is the biggest position need the White Sox should target in the offseason?
I think that the most logical answer would be bullpen, just given how bad the bullpen has been over the last season or two, probably the season 2.5 seasons going back to 2023. And there's a lot of good bullpen arms out there, man. Like if you just look at the relief pitching market, there's a lot of high-end closers that the White Sox probably aren't going to be in the market for because this team isn't a closer away from contending. And I'm not going to say that the White Sox should recreate that $70 million bullpen that they did in 2022 when they signed basically every bullpen arm ever.
I hope that never happens ever again.
That was a fun time, but you can look up and down that relief pitching market, and there are a lot of guys that would instantly be upgrades over pretty much any bullpen arm. Elijah and I talked about this on the podcast that actually released today as we're recording. We went over the entire relief pitching market, and you can probably find 2 bullpen arms that you can plug and play in that White Sox bullpen. Probably in the back end, you can probably sign them for $10 million a piece. Like, let's say you sign, I think we came up with Sean Armstrong for $6 million from the Rangers, and then Hobie Milner, also from I think it was a Ranger and a Brewer this year. I can't remember which teams, but you can sign both, like Armstrong for $6 million, Milner for $4 million, and you can go into the season with a solid middle inning bullpen combo, because then we also said that Steven Wilson, Grant Taylor, Mike Vassell, and who was the other one? That we had 4 locks. Jordan Leisure. We had those 4 locks as like guys who are cemented in the bullpen for next year. But then you look past that, and there's not really many arms that I would trust giving the ball to. If you've followed me, if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you know how much I don't like Brandon Eisert. He allows any runner that touches base to touch home. So I think that the White Sox need a better everyday, I'm not going to say every day, but like consistent lefty out of the pen. And I think Hobie Milner can give you that. So I think that bullpen is probably the area that I would address first, because you can flip them at the deadline if you're not contending, which the White Sox probably won't. So I think that bullpen is probably the way to go. But, if you wanted to go out and splurge on like a Josh Naylor, Eugenio Suarez. Like, I wouldn't hate that, but I think that the White Sox are probably a year removed from that addition to raise the ceiling so much as raising the floor. I think that this offseason is probably the last one where, you're signing veterans to 1-year deals to flip them at the deadline. But I think the bullpen is probably the way I would go, but we'll see.
All right. I do agree with you on the bullpen. This would be my one exception where they should spend a little bit of money. I like the names that you threw out. Brandon Eisert, the only thing that I'll push back on is I think he's just properly miscast. He could be fine as your long reliever lefty. And I think that's where he is.
Fair.
And I think what
he can't be high leverage.
Yeah, he can't be. And I think the other reason why they need to pursue relievers is twofold. Number one is you can only have 2 low leverage guys for how Will Venable wants to deploy his bullpen. So let's say you got Eisert in there and you got to find then another righty long reliever. So maybe it's Jonathan Cannon. But still, as you said, you got to get high leverage because they need at least 6 high leverage guys with how Will Venable doesn't like to categorize an official closer. He wants to be new age, use those guys in high leverage situations that may appear, as we've seen, even the World Series, the 6th or the 7th inning. Sometimes those games still stay tight and you need somebody in the 9th inning. And that's why you had to have Brandon Eisert in the 9th inning because you had no other options. Because as you said, you mentioned the 4 guys, basically. That was it. They need a couple more arms. So I hope they do that. Because especially as you being a guy that follows prospects, man, has the reliever market been so good to rebuilding teams when they try to sell them at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Aroldis Chapman when he got traded from the Royals to the Pirates. Who did the Royals get back? They got back Cole Reagan, from the Rangers. Sorry, Royals to the Rangers. The Rangers gave up Cole Reagans, and then Reagans finishes top 5 in Cy Young last year. There's a valuable market for high leverage relievers that have proven time and time again that they can throw in the postseason. And, maybe Sean Armstrong and Hobie Milner aren't going to be like commanding that much on the trade market. But, there's a lot of guys out there in the relief pitching market, especially this offseason, where it could very easily be you can get a good package for them because relief pitchers are volatile, man. They can turn on a dime like that, and they can throw 2 months of sub-2 ERA baseball. So if that ends up being the White Sox like total offseason, I wouldn't say I would be pleased with it, but I wouldn't say that I would be completely disappointed because you look at the lineup and the rotation, and there's really there's not a lot of room that you can say, oh yeah, they need to go out and get a first baseman, a second baseman. There's a lot of question marks as to where everybody fits in, but I don't think that there's necessarily a hole in the lineup right now or in the rotation where you can say we need that in order to be a contending team in 2027 or 2028, wherever the White Sox choose to turn that corner. I don't think that you can definitively say that they're a starting pitcher 3 away or they're a right fielder away, which, yeah, the White Sox have always been a right fielder away. But I don't think that there's that glaring of a hole in the lineup, which it's a good thing and a bad thing because you're going to be knocking out some guys that could be pieces. Like we'll talk about him, I assume, in a minute here, but like Sam Antonacci is coming up very hot on Chase Meidroth's heels. And Chase Meidroth wasn't great this year, but he was a fan favorite. And let's say that Antonacci ends up winning the second baseman role. Where does Chase Meidroth play? Do you trade him? Do you? I don't know what his future looks like, especially if Sam Antonacci continues to do what he does.
All right, well, let's get into some prospect talk after the break, especially how next season can still be a prospect watch season. We'll discuss that with Dylan after the break. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action. And if you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And I love how simple of a concept Prize Picks is. Pretty much, if I think a player is going to have a great game, I can pick the more option on the player projection. If I think the player is going to stink, I just go with the less option. The new Stacks feature is a game changer. You can now pick more on a superstar player like Steph Curry's points, threes, and assists in the same lineup. Plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot saves your lineup from a loss. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox wherever they get their podcasts, as the show's available on all major podcast platforms. And here with Dylan Barnas of FutureSox.net and Just Baseball. And you did mention Sam Antonacci, and I think he's going to be one of the prospects that you want to keep an eye on. And the reason why I want to talk about maybe is it still kind of a next season going to be a prospect watch, because a lot of the guys have already now come up that, you know, they entered, remember, the beginning of the season with a highly regarded farm system. Now it's kind of thinned out, at least in terms of the rankings. So outside of Antonacci, who else is worth tracking next season?
If we're talking about like tracking up to the big leagues, I don't know how you could start this without saying Tanner McDougal and Noah Schultz, because Tanner McDougal just had probably the greatest pitching prospect season in the entire White Sox organization this year. He was my pick for White Sox pitching prospect of the year. I mean, his command suddenly just ticked up 2 like full grades after Tommy John that he had in 2023, I want to say. So command is always the last thing that comes back after you have Tommy John, and McDougal, he found it this year. I mean, he was lights out for the majority of the season, and he was on an innings limit after the All-Star break. So he didn't get to throw. He didn't just get to throw whatever he wanted, wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted. So it just kind of seemed like he was bored, and then his numbers sort of backed up because he wasn't allowed to throw. Like, he wasn't just allowed to run free. But I mean, if he doesn't have an innings limit this year, I think that he could be up very, very quickly, because he's going to need to be added to the 40-man in about 3 weeks here when the Rule 5 deadline is. And, you know, if he's on the 40-man, I'm not sure that there are many pitchers on the White Sox right now that I would take over Tanner McDougal. Like, Shane Smith is great. I think that he's probably the only pitcher on the White Sox where I would definitively say, yeah, you're better than Tanner McDougal. So I think that he's easily the first name that comes to mind when I think of prospects rising up to the majors. And then I think Noah Schultz is in that bucket too. You know, we were all sort of expecting him to be up at the end of this year. And, you know, he was banged up pretty much. We're hearing he was banged up pretty much all year with that knee injury. And, you know, you can't really, I'm not going to say that he's like still that top 10 prospect that he was coming into last year, but I think that you can at least say that some of his struggles this year were due to that knee issue. And if he takes an offseason to get healthy and to just get right, I think that he is, again, one of the first arms to come up, because you look at the stuff that he has and just the command, again, it wasn't great due to the knee is I think what I'm going to say, because I still believe in Noah Schultz to be that top of the line starting pitcher 1 or starting pitcher 2. So I think that McDougal and Schultz are the clear 1 and 2 answers. But then on the hitting side, I think Braden Montgomery is coming quick, because you look at what he's doing in the Arizona Fall League right now. I don't think that there's a better outfield prospect in the White Sox system right now. And I'm really not sure if there's a better hitting prospect in the White Sox system. Elijah and I ranked our top 10 White Sox prospects like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and there was a case to be made for Braden Montgomery as the overall number 1 prospect in the White Sox system, because his ceiling is just so high. Like, it's something that the White Sox haven't seen since the days of Jermaine Dye in the late 2000s, where a right fielder could genuinely hit 40 home runs for the White Sox. And I think that a lot of fans were fired up to get him in the Garrett Crochet deal, just like they were for Kyle Teel. And I think that Braden Montgomery is going to show them why everybody was fired up, because he looks great right now in the Arizona Fall League. And yeah, he's gotten hurt on 2 freak accidents in college. You know, he broke his leg sliding into home plate in the super regionals. That's a freak accident. And then he ended this season after fouling a pitch off of his foot and just broke a small bone in his foot. So you can say that, like, oh yeah, he's got to stay healthy for a full year. But I don't think that he's in that camp of like the Eloy Jimenez's, where it's always soft tissue injury after soft tissue injury. I think that he's probably up maybe after a trade deadline move off of Luis Robert, Andrew Benintendi, maybe if Mike Tauchman is still there. and he's shown the chops to play center field. That's something that I really wasn't expecting coming into this year, because I was sort of penciling him in to being that right field every day. But he played center field and played it well, especially in Kannapolis and Winston-Salem. Like, he was a very good outfielder this year, and he's got a cannon of an arm. Like, that's why I initially pushed him to right. But I think when you can have that sort of combination of power and a great arm, I think that he's going to be up very shortly after the All-Star break next year.
The thing that I like about what he's doing right now in the Arizona Fall League is he's keeping the strikeouts down. And I think that's actually just my biggest concern. Yes, the health. The other reason why that's why I might want him to play a little bit more right, because even though they were freaks, accidents, you don't want to put maybe his bones, you don't want to put too much stress on that type of stuff. But the strikeouts have got to make sure they come down. And he's starting to show that he's got better plate discipline, at least in this. Yeah. Now, granted, you are facing a little bit different pitcher. I mean, one day you're facing a guy at AAA. The next day you're facing a guy at low A, but he's still, or even the next inning, but he's still showing very good plate discipline right now in the AFL.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said right there, I think that the plate discipline is something that a lot of fans were looking at this year and saying, like, all right, he's got to keep the strikeout rate under, let's say, 25%. And, it wasn't necessarily Sam Antonacci-esque, where he's walking at a 15% clip and striking out at, like, I think it was 13 this year, something like that. But, he's got a good eye. The only thing that I would knock on him is just the bat to ball skills in the zone, especially. He takes a lot of hacks at outside pitches and just pulls off of them too quickly. I think that he's trying to lean into that sort of like dead pull hitter, but when he's at his best, he's spraying balls all over the field, and he has the raw power to go backside and hit a ball 400 feet to left field. Like, as a lefty, you don't see many people doing that. There's Shohei Ohtani, Kyle Schwarber, Juan Soto. Like, it's those three guys and not many others. Like, Braden Montgomery's power is very real, and if he can just develop some more bat to ball skills, it's going to be really, really fun. And especially if he starts the season in AAA at that bandbox of a stadium they have in Charlotte, it's going to be really fun to see him just moonshot after moonshot. Like, that AAA team could be really, really fun to start the year, especially if Sam Antonacci doesn't break camp with the team, which I don't expect him to. But I mean, you could have a lineup of Sam Antonacci at second, short, wherever, Braden Montgomery in right field, and then probably Noah Schultz, maybe a Hagen Smith gets a promotion, maybe Tanner McDougal starts the year in AAA. There's going to be a lot of fun names to watch in Charlotte, where, the past couple of years, the White Sox have just been calling up guys from AA, especially on the pitching side. They don't want to send their big name pitchers to AAA because they're gonna get rocked if they pitch in that park. Like, it's not a knock on them. It's just fly balls turn into homers there. Like, it's just a knock on their confidence, or it can set back their confidence that they built up playing in AA, where the Southern League is one of the more pitching friendly leagues in the entire minor leagues. So I think that McDougal is probably going to open the year in AAA, but if he started in AA and then just got the call up straight from AA, like Drew Thorpe did a couple of years ago, or last year, sorry. But I think that the AAA team is going to be really fun to start the year.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what they make. The offseason additions too will dictate that, because for example, if they don't spend a lot of money on the bullpen, do they entertain? I mean, I'm glad that they are developing McDougal to a ceiling, but do they look at it and say, hey, this guy can, throw a lot. Let's go get some, a couple starters that maybe we can flip and then parking lot him and just have him throw out of the bullpen. So it's very interesting to see what they're going to do with Tanner McDougal. Does he break camp in the starter spot? Because I think he should be given a chance to, because you can only pencil in Martin and Shane Smith. So does he get a chance to compete? Shane Murphy, is that another guy? Does he get a chance to compete? Do they go cheap and only maybe bring back Martin Perez? And now you got some guys competing for that. It's going to be such an interesting dynamic of what they're going to do with those young arms. But before I wrap up, I want to get back to Sam Antonacci, because I did an episode a couple days ago talking about who's on thin ice. And I do want to circle back to what you said about Chase Meidroth. I think he actually has to have a good regular season next year to prove he can be the everyday second baseman, because he's a fine player. But if he does not have a good average, I think you can make the case for saying Sam Antonacci has better bat to ball skills that can match what Chase Meidroth can do. And he might be the better player, because neither one of them are going to be hitting home runs, but maybe Sam Antonacci is the solution long-term at second base. So how big of a is it for Chase Meidroth to have a big season next year?
I think it's going to be his career. Like, I think that if he doesn't bat, like I think he batted like 240 this year. He's got better bat to ball skills than that. We all have seen him slap a single the other way for a base knock, but he's got to be more aggressive in the zone. He had the lowest zone swing rate of any player in the league, and he's got a good eye. He chases some pitches here and there, but I think he just has to be more aggressive. And, it comes down to pitch selection. I feel like he takes middle pitches a lot of the times. And, Sam Antonacci, he's a very like fun hitter because he looks for, on the first pitch, he looks for one pitch in one spot. And if he doesn't get it, he's going to run an 8-9 pitch at bat and probably walk, because if he doesn't get the pitch that he wants, he's going to foul it off. And the thing that stands out to me when I compare Antonacci and Meidroth is Meidroth's hard contact is on the ground a lot. Like, he doesn't necessarily lift the ball in the gaps. Like, if he hits a hard ground ball, it's probably at a fielder. Sam Antonacci is very good at elevating it just enough to get it into the gap and skate onto the wall. Like, Chase Meidroth has that over the fence power, yes, but it's very, very minimal. Sam Antonacci hit a ball 420 feet in the Arizona Fall League. I don't think that Chase Meidroth has that type of pop. And then it also comes down to stolen bases. Sam Antonacci stole almost 50 bases this year. And yeah, it's the minor leagues, but he's a real stolen base threat. And I think that a lot of fans don't know that about him. Like, we try and tell people as much as possible, Sam Antonacci is not just a contact guy who's going to park at first base. He wants to steal bases. He wants to extend the inning and force the defense to make plays. And, if it comes down to it, I think that Chase Meidroth, if he doesn't bat like 280, if he doesn't have that average jump a significant amount, I think he's going to be on the outside looking in for that second base job.
All right, well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or listen to your podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with another Way Back Wednesday segment. You can leave comments about today's episode on the episode page on YouTube, via email, lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, on X, formerly Twitter, @LockedOnSox or @TajDub. And Dylan, again, where can we find all your great content?
FutureSox.net is the written side of things for prospects. Podcast form, Future Sox Roundup. It's myself and Elijah Evans. Check out my podcast with him. Check out Ian and James's podcast. That's just the base Future Sox podcast. And then justbaseball.com. Started writing there. Going to be churning out a lot of offseason stuff, articles, everything under the sun, in relation to the White Sox. So thank you, Todd, for having me on.
No problem. There's going to be a day where I'm going to say, hey, I knew Dylan when. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube or leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel Locked On White Sox, wherever you get your audio-only podcast. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.